Welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. And today we're going to be taking you through some of our insights from our 2024 Hays Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Report, which this year focuses on the impact of DE&I efforts on hiring and retaining talent. Our report draws comparisons with our 2019 research to evaluate what progress has been made over the last 5 years when it comes to DE&I in the workplace and where there's still work to be done. The report is based on our survey of over 5,700 employers and employees from across the UK. We received responses from a broad range of sectors, levels of seniority and size of organisation. Our research also received responses from professionals across a range of age groups, ethnicities, nationalities and more, allowing us to take a deeper dive into the views of individuals from different backgrounds. So I'm Beth Waite. I'm Head of HR Shared Services for DE&I at Hays. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm white with fair hair and freckles. And today I've got a navy blue t-shirt on and I'm in an office. I joined Hays as a recruitment consultant in 1998 before moving into the world of training and development in 2001, which was the start of a really, really varied career across people and culture. Since 2014, I've led on diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives that impact employees and the culture of the organisation, and hopefully work towards ensuring an inclusive working environment so that people from all different backgrounds can succeed when they get here. And I'm really delighted to welcome our guest speakers today, who will be joining me in a panel discussion delving into the findings of our report. We'll also be taking questions from you. We've had some submitted already, and please submit any that you have in the Q&A, and we'll endeavour to get through them towards the end of this webinar. We'll be going into more detail about the themes taken from the guide over the next hour. Before we do, I'd like to introduce our expert panel. So first of all, joining me today are Peter Hall, a DE&I consultant at Hays. Peter is a highly respected subject matter expert in the fields of workplace diversity and inclusion and conscious bias and inclusive leadership. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Peter has collaborated extensively with a wide array of organisations, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of diversity, equity and inclusion. Throughout his career, he has held senior and management positions across various sectors, including private, charity and public organisations. As a consultant, Peter has honed his expertise in developing comprehensive DE&I strategies, and his work extends globally, addressing the unique needs of organisations across the regions. Welcome, Peter. We also have Joel Blake, OBE, the founding CEO of GFA Exchange. Joel is a strategy advisor and speaker specialising in inclusive innovation with over 20 years of experience across banking, fintech, wider professional services, and recognised with an OBE for services to business support and enterprise. In 2016, he's the founding CEO of GFA Exchange, which is an AI-enabled platform as a service solution designed to help finance providers optimise their portfolios whilst reducing human bias. Joel is also the founder of the ESG Future Growth Forum, which is a peer-to-peer development network for responsible leaders, board advisor for fintech investment fund Taranis Capital, is that right, Joel, in pronunciation? And chair of leading social mobility charity Employability UK. And we're also joined by Jason Dunwell. Jason is Head of Solutions for the UK&I at Hays, helping organisations find the right solutions for their resourcing challenges and navigating the complex and ever-changing talent landscape through a range of HR advisory services, such as DE&I, early careers, EVP and brand, assessment and development, career transition services, insights, analytics, and much more. So thank you again for joining us today. So before we hand over to our really illustrious panel, I'll first take you through some of the key findings from our 2024 Diversity, Equity and Inclusion report, and there will be some polls and some opportunities for interactions along the way. So our report takes a closer look at the significance of talent attraction, hiring plans and talent retention in achieving DE&I goals. Number 1, from a talent attraction perspective, recruiting from a diverse range of job candidates is often the first step towards building a diverse workforce. Key strategies include targeted recruitment campaigns and partnerships with diverse organisations. In terms of hiring plans, there is a growing trend towards inclusive hiring practices, with many organisations implementing bias mitigation strategies and anonymised recruitment processes. The retention of diverse talent remains a challenge for organisations, with many employees feeling that their career progression is limited by various factors such as age, gender, and ethnicity. Let's take a closer look at what our research tells us about these three areas. So, searching for roles. Let's first explore talent attraction. Our research shows how important it is to publicise your DE&I commitments when attracting talent. Around 6 out of 10 applicants typically always or sometimes look for an organisation's DE&I policies and commitments when researching for jobs. More than half of professionals would also feel more comfortable applying for roles knowing that an employer uses anonymised recruitment in their selection process, giving them more confidence that they will be fairly considered. This percentage rises to more than 60% of those from different demographics. For example, those from different ethnic backgrounds, those who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community, and those who are neurodivergent. So looking at the importance of data, or capturing diversity data in the application process, I'd like to ask the audience your thoughts with a quick poll on which should be appearing on your screens now. Our research shows that 49% of organisations are currently capturing the demographic diversity data of applicants. Do you think that this percentage is higher or lower than this, or the same as 5 years ago in 2019? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to complete that. Thank you, everyone. If you chose higher than 2019, then you're correct. Only 39% of organisations captured diversity data in 2019, which has risen to nearly half. This increase shows a growing commitment to transparency and informed decision-making around DE&I. A further 18% of organisations do not capture this data at all, which is a decrease from 40% in 2019. This highlights a significant opportunity for organisations to enhance their DE&I strategy by implementing robust data collection practices to help better understand their employees' needs and wants when it comes to DE&I. So looking at hiring practices, and I'd like to get your thoughts again on the stat on screen in another quick poll. Our research shows that 57% of respondents believe their chances of being selected for a role have been lowered due to identifying characteristics such as their gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. Do you think this percentage is higher, lower, or the same as 2019? And again, I'll give you a couple of seconds to choose your answer. So if you chose higher, again, you're right. Our research back in 2019 showed that 52% of professionals felt their chances for being selected for a new job were lowered because of an identifying characteristic, rising to 57% in 2024. Age was highlighted as a main factor. 61% of employees feel they have limited their choices of successfully getting a new role. Workers over the age of 40 are more likely to feel discriminated against due to their age at 70%, than their younger counterparts, which only came in at 47%. Okay, so looking at overcoming bias in the application process. So bias within the hiring process is an ongoing issue. Fortunately, it's being tackled with a stark difference from 5 years ago. For example, 72% say that they use a structured interview process compared to only 66% in 2019. Over half, at 54%, now provide bias challenging training to hiring managers and interviewers, an uplift from around a third, 34% in 2019. A further 53% of of organisations adjust their tests and assessments to ensure they are fair for those with disabilities and impairments, compared to 45% 5 years ago. And almost half of organisations have also introduced anonymised recruitment into stages of the selection process to mitigate bias in the decision-making process. Talent retention. How does poor communication during the hiring process impact on the retention of diverse talent? 56% of employees say that they have felt that an interviewer has misled them in the representation or articulation of company culture. So in our last poll of the morning, do you think this percentage is higher, lower, or the same as back in 2019? And just wait for you to submit your choices. So if you chose the same, then you're right. So that's a little bit of difference there. This percentage has not changed at all over the last 5 years. This increases to more than 7 in 10 of those from different demographics, including those part of the LGBTQ plus community who live with a disability or those who are neurodiverse. Furthermore, more than half of professionals say that they have left a job because of a bad cultural fit, i.e. they felt disengaged due to a lack of shared values, vision, or beliefs. This highlights the importance of communicating an accurate view of what it's like to work in your organisation in order to be able to retain a diverse workforce. So the evolution of DE&I, the way organisations refer to DE&I is also evolving. Over the last 2 years, 17% of organisations say they have changed the way they refer to DE&I, and doing so signifies to both new and existing staff a shift in an organisation's focus and priorities when it comes to diversity, equity and inclusion. Our survey shows that over half, at 56%, of organisations refer to their initiatives as DE&I, with a quarter, at 25%, using the term DEIW, so including wellbeing, and 5% using DEIB, so including belonging. These changes show the changing nature of DE&I efforts from a top-down level, as well as increasing emphasis on wellbeing in the workplace. Our employees say that 71% of respondents believe positive employee wellbeing is linked to DE&I in the workplace. Over the last 5 years, the availability of flexible working arrangements such as hybrid and remote working have increased, and almost 4 out of 5 respondents, at 79%, feel that this has had a positive impact on creating a more diverse and inclusive workplace. This positive view is even higher for carers at a whole 83% and parents with a dependent child at 81%. These positive sentiments also extend to the growth of collaborative technologies that allow individuals to work together wherever they're based, with 83% highlighting that tech's positive impact when it comes to fostering diversity and inclusion at work. So looking ahead at what employees believe is the most important factor for future success of DE&I, leadership showing demonstrable commitment to inclusive practices absolutely at the top of the list, with 32% of respondents stating so. Positively, 82% of employees say that C-suite leaders in their organisations are supportive of DE&I initiatives, of whom 54% believe that this has improved over the last 5 years. So that's just some of the findings from our Diversity, Equity and Inclusion report. The guide itself contains lots and lots more information, and you can access the full findings by accessing the link that we will send over to you after the webinar. So please do keep an eye on your inbox. So we're now going to pick up with our panel to discuss these findings in a little bit more detail and what they mean for organisations. So we've had some questions submitted in advance. So panelists, I hope you're ready. No buzzers required for this. Okay, so this year's report highlights that 69% of professionals believe that greater diversity and inclusion positively impacts company culture. How can organisations implement this to help attract and retain diverse talent? And what specific strategies have proven most effective? Do you have any examples of DE&I initiatives that improved talent retention? Fully aware that's a multiple question. And that one goes to Jason.
Thanks. Get me started with a nice easy one, Beth. I
That's right.
appreciate that.
You're absolutely welcome.
Um, okay, so let me break that down. So yeah, I guess my perspective is that you first have to accept that it isn't something that you do and move on from. So when I think about what I see that is good, you've got to appreciate that this needs an ongoing focus, and then whatever we do from a DE&I and well-being perspective has to be embedded, woven into the fabric of the organisation. That's my starting, I guess, response. Um, what I see working in organizations and I guess clients that we work with is when we have a really clear vision and message that sets out the kind of commitment to D&I and where leaders authentically support it and live it. And yes, the policies and the processes, yes, they need to be in place. But the aspects that stand out from me to try and answer that question are when the approach and the quality of data is really in focus. So, what are we doing with that data? What are some of the decisions that we're making? How are we using that insight to drive the strategy? So we're
Mhm.
almost this a continuous improvement mindset as opposed to I've done something and I've completed. Um, some of the specifics around strategies that I like and that I can see have been effective end-to-end reviews, but being forensic, being diagnostic, you've got to audit what's happening to truly know what's going on. It's not gut feel, it's not just what people say. You've got to dive into it, and kind of keeping our talent acquisition hat on, you've got to maintain that candidate centricity because we're going to make improvements, but we've got to also make it sure that it works in terms of the actual hiring of individuals. The big differentiator that I see is planning. A lot of, I think, what makes organizations successful, and if I just focus for now on the how would you find and hire talent, you've got to get yourself off the hamster wheel. Some of the steps that we would advise, you can't do quickly, you can't do as a part of BAU. You've got to plan to authentically engage with target communities and underrepresented talent. We've got to think around how we're going to, meaningfully engage. And so therefore you can't do that in the normal kind of transactional working of we've got lots of vacancies to fill. So that workforce planning, that resource planning to stop and decide what are we going to do differently and work out how to do it differently to have a significant impact on the talent that we're bringing in, I think is key. Um, it'd be remiss of me though to not think about how we ensure we've got a compelling offer. So, leveraging kind of benchmarking and an employee value proposition to make sure that we're really targeting and kind of speaking the right language and we've got the right points to get across to our target candidates. And then I guess finally it's about assessment. Um, lots of us work in large organizations. There are lots of hiring managers. HR, D&I professionals cannot be in the room every time we choose to hire somebody. So, what is our approach to rigorous and reliable assessment? And how are we sure that we are making good decisions for now, but also for the future? So, um, that's the hiring bit. I think on the retention part of your multifaceted question that you
Yes,
gave
sorry
me to
about that.
start with, thanks. So from a retention piece, I mean, you highlighted some of it, right? So for me, I think the three big things. We know that the disconnect between the offer that's made and reality is massive. I think you said 56% were feeling misled.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really, really clear on what it's like, and we've got to lean into the truth. All right, we can't sugarcoat it. Um, culture is massive. Culture and representation. We've got to be honest about what it's like. So it's still related to the EVP point, but we start to remember that EVP is a really good tool for retention as well.
Hmm.
We see it in attraction, but our colleagues, our employees are seeing the same content, as the people that we would like to attract. So thinking about those, I guess those two different cohorts are those we want to attract and those we want to retain. Because if we get the culture right and we articulate it clearly, we won't
Mm.
have that 53% leaving, like you said. And then the final one, I think, for me is probably around career development. And I think that was crystallized for me in our last report, the What Workers Want survey, where we were seeing that 78% of individuals saying that they needed to see the commitment from an organization in terms of career development to keep them. And I guess for me, whilst it's not just a D&I angle, that is also about how we're going to train. What are the right interventions that we're demonstrating to an individual that we've got their career at the center of our thoughts and our decisions. So I
Excellent.
think
Well, you
that's
did
my
a really good
attempt.
job. You did a really good job of a multifaceted question there. Thank you very much. Okay, so based on experiences, panelists, what are the most common misconceptions that organisations have about DE&I, and how do you address those misconceptions to drive meaningful change? Can overcoming these misconceptions lead to improvements in organisations' DE&I effort? And that also multiple question is going to Peter Hall.
Oh, thank you. That is, that is another multiple question, another easy one to go into. Okay, right. What are the common misconceptions? So I think the common misconception we talk about DEI is around actually this only benefits kind of marginalized, underrepresented groups, and that's not the case. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm bringing equity into that because that sometimes gets confused with equality, depending on your
Hmm.
perspective. And just for clarity, equity is around to treat me equally. You may need to treat me differently in order to get the kind of the same outcomes. It's the reason why organizations kind of leaning to making workplace adjustments for their colleagues and their peers in order to be the best versions of themselves. That's really important. But when we talk about the misconception, it's about DE&I for everyone. It leads to higher retention, lower turnover, more innovation. And so we need to be absolutely clear when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, everyone has a voice. It's been a long while, at the beginning of my career, there used to be this statement, and really, really unfair. It would talk about pale, male, and stale. And hopefully we're not hearing that language anymore, which is really great. But that used to be the misconception around that, and it's not. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a place, because we don't know individuals, we don't know their backgrounds, we don't know where they come from as such. So we need to be really mindful that we're inclusive. The other misconception, particularly as we're now focusing around attraction, is that there is this kind of thought, and we did have this touch upon it earlier on, is that diversity, equity, inclusion around hiring means hiring less qualified candidates and such, which is absolutely not true. Nobody from a marginalized, underrepresented group wants to attain a job, a promotion, a board level appointment based on their protected characteristic, based on their visualization, their identity as such. They want to be there on talent. They want to be there because they're the best candidate for the role. And so what we need to do really as all organizations, it's about removing the biases, ensuring that we are providing equity of opportunity for all. And it's not only about just finding the best talent, and we talked about age and how older workers are feeling. It's about really about talent in all its forms and all its guises. And as Jason pointed out, interestingly, in order to do that, we may have to change up some things that we've done before in the past as such. So I know some hiring practices and some recruiters use Boolean searches. Well, that's kind of doesn't engage, it doesn't kind of excite. What we may need to do is actually go into maybe some of these communities, build workplace relationships, go into LinkedIn communities, develop a presence there, start talking to people. So when those opportunities do arise, we can engage and we can have meaningful dialogue with those individuals we may be having conversations with. And so it's really key that we kind of mitigate this. It's not about kind of hiring less qualified, it's hiring the best person, best candidate for that role. There is also this conception around ED&I is only for like if you've got ED&I in your title and stuff like that. And it's fundamentally not the case. I believe fundamentally in organization, everyone's a leader. as such, and definitely has the ability to be a leader. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's about everyone's responsibility, everyone's engaged as such, because we don't know, in terms of our workforce, who has the ambition, aspiration to rise as such. And that's why we need those visible role models. And what that sends out, that's about actually, that just tells me it can be done. And it doesn't necessarily need to be from my group. It just needs to be from different groups. But if I see that, I know there's a chance. I know there's an opportunity for me to be seen. I know I can be developed if that's my ambition, if that's my aspiration as such. Where I don't see that and I don't feel that, I may start to feel disconnected slightly in some way. And so it's really important that everyone takes this on board and everybody can have a voice and be heard. And the last one, and it really can maybe play into this a bit later on, is that when we are talking about DE&I, it's trouble, isn't it? It's opening a can of worms, if you like. We don't have the time, or we're scared. What if we get it wrong? What if we inadvertently say the wrong thing, so we say nothing? What if we do the wrong thing, and therefore we don't take any action? And so we need to kind of be really purposeful around this. We need to start thinking about actually where are the real benefits, in terms of open up, because when we engage, we open up the doors to innovation and growth. It opens up the opportunity to create truly dynamic workplaces. And playing into that piece that Jason said earlier about kind of doing the audit, when we're doing like a cultural audit of an organization around, around the inclusion of behaviors, because that's what drives real change as such. That's when we have an opportunity to promote transparency and get feedback. So, that communication, that top down, but also that bottom up. So it shows an organization is listening and tuning in as such. So that's kind of the key misconceptions that some people may have, or organizations may have, around ED&I.
Thanks, Peter. It's really interesting. And actually, none of us need the report to tell us that leadership is critical here. And all of the things that you've all been talking about so far, ultimately need to be, sanctioned and stood up for by our most senior leaders everywhere. So Joel, from your perspective, what are the key actions that you'd say leaders need to take to be able to demonstrate the kind of commitment required to motivate their workforce and make change?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question because it depends in some ways on the school of thought and the conditioning of the leaders themselves. I guess I sit at the other end of the scale when it's looking at how organizations can really utilize DE&I, and I agree with Peter. I consign to the kind of equity perception of DE. But what I find and certainly in conversations with organizations is that the leaders themselves are challenged in some way of looking at how they need to operate in the modern world of business. And that some of the more traditional ways that have helped them to get them where they are not as relevant as before, or indeed needing evolving in order to move ahead. So some of the key actions is really looking at their own sense of authentic leadership value that they now provide at this time in their organization. And I guess slightly deeper into that, it's about looking at, well, what drove me from day one to be into this position? And what do I now need to do to improve in order to ensure that I'm aligning my values through the role with the authentic values of the workforce that I'm either have or trying to develop in order to do things in the most equitable and inclusive way. And that's not always easy, because certainly as leaders, that means you're having to check your own level of vulnerability. You're having to really assess, professional standing and qualifications. It's really about understanding the impact of what that truly means in this modern day world of business. And so when it comes to then aligning with workforces and demonstrating that to your workforce, and then attracting, retaining the type of diverse talent that's going to help your organization move forward, you then have to almost move into a much more innovative entrepreneurial mindset in order to understand that there are problems that we need to solve, and we need to have the widest range of thoughts, the widest range of values, widest range of insights to be able to provide the most innovative ways to solve problems. And so you have to create a very inclusive culture from a very authentic standpoint in order to be able to unlock the innovation, as Peter alluded to slightly earlier as well, in terms of that then next phase of growth. How do you become much more cutting edge, being on the front foot without losing the core values that you're supposed to stand for as an organization and indeed stand for as a leader. So that's kind of what we're seeing. So the actions is really about that self-reflection and that kind of taking the stock of where you are, but also where you need to be and how you're going to get there, and understanding that as a leader, you can either be at the front, but there's got to be times you're going to have to be that servant leader from the back as well. And being making sure that you're flexible enough in your leadership style to adapt to the inclusive changes that are going to take place inside and outside the organization in terms of the markets that you're in. Certainly what we're seeing and I guess some of the actions that we see in organizations taking are under three pillars, and what we're seeing is a bit of a convergence really of these three areas of the modern perception of diversity, which is often subjective depending on who you're talking to. You've got then data, and I think you might have alluded to that earlier, Jason, as well, in terms of the data itself, but not so much the data and the insights you can extract from that to help underpin strategies to deliver, but also where are the data sources, what data sources are you using, and how are you measuring and dealing with the human biases that are often not always identified correctly, shall we say, when acknowledging those data sources and utilizing those data sources in order to then start the process of getting the insight. And then thirdly, the digital technologies, and I won't go into all of those, but we all know that we're in such a digital age where things are moving at such a speed. New technologies are coming up every single day. Gen AI is here to stay and more. And so how do organizations, and more specifically, how do leaders ensure that they are up to speed with the convergence in those three things? How are they making sure that they're getting the right people, the right data to leverage the skills, talents, knowledge, the inclusive power of people, then the right data to extract the insights that can utilize that, but then utilizing technologies to be able to scale and drive ahead and to be competitive. Because let's be very clear, we are all singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of the importance of this subject. But for many organizations, it is about competitive advantage. It is about commercial bottom line. It is about making sure that they are getting this balance between being commercially successful and being responsible in all its shape and form. And so we have to be able to enable leaders to take actions that enable them to maintain that balance. And that is always going to be an ongoing challenge.
That's interesting, because the second part of that question, Joel, is how can leaders balance DE&I initiatives with core business objectives to ensure they get the best results? Now, that's interesting to me, because if you've got an eye on the angle at which people are going to come at a problem from, could be driven by their experiences, their background outside of work. They're one and the same, and you don't separate them, because that means they have the two are linked to performance in the same way. What would be your view on that question?
Personally, I would say in order for your organization to be successful, you have to make sure your people feel successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's fundamental.
Yeah.
And so I personally, I don't care what business sector you're in, it's about your people first. And so my position has always been, we need to get the best people, the best talented people. We need to get the most inclusive and diverse people possible in all its guises in order to unlock the innovative power that lies within each individual person. I'm not going to be all, I guess, kumbaya and sit around a campfire and start toasting
Oh, really?
But the reality is that, I come from a very much a philosophical place that, if we support people at their in a human spirit, human-centered approach, you give people permission to be their best selves.
And they'll do their best work.
And they'll do their best work. People know what good looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they might need direction to see how they can excel to another level that they may not yet be aware of or may not feel they're confident to get to. But people genuinely know what good looks like. And so how do we help them to understand what great looks like? And how we help them to understand how they can be great first so they can enact on that. For me, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs upside down. That's the simplest way I could look at it. If people can see themselves in that right position first at the highest level, and then feel they've got the permission to bring that into a work environment, then you're unlocking you're unleashing the power that we all want to see and collectively be able to harness to create amazing things. And I think that's where leaders should always start from.
Peter, now I know one of your areas of expertise is leadership, so without wishing to spring something on you, do you have a view on that question?
I do. I mean, I totally align with what Joel was saying. And as Joel was speaking, the first aspect as a leader, I see it's about how do you get people to open up? It's about creating that psychological safety.
Mm.
Absolutely fundamental. Because
Hmm.
without that, you're not even going to open up. You can invert the curve and in great model, Joel, because I'm kind of picturing things. That's how I see things. But unless I feel safe to do so, to be my authentic self, and I will test out the waters, you're just not going to see it. And that might be the relationship, with my colleagues around me. So playing into, I say, because I've got a much deeper connection with them. And then you kind of get cultures within culture within the organization. So I have a culture within my team. I have a culture within my department, and then I've got a wider culture with the organization as such. And so there's different kind of tipping points along the way. And I might be more open to some than others, but I choose which phase I feel comfortable to share as such. So as a leader, how do I do that? Going back to that, how can I be human? Dare I say, how can I show vulnerability? Which sometimes in some organizations, irrespective of sector, is absolutely you don't do that. But actually, when you show vulnerability as a leader, you better connect with people. You messed up, but you learn from it. And when people see that you're human, it just builds more powerful workplace relationships as a leader. So how do we do that? And how do we flex our style of leadership as well? Joe made a great point. There are times when we need to be a pragmatist. So using our position, we influence from behind and behind the scenes. We don't need to be up front. There are other times we can be more like the dialogue, an ally, standing shoulder to shoulder and have that point. But you know what? There are more times where actually, and don't forget, today's what week we're in National Inclusion Week. It's about making an impact. I've been in this, and I call it. First of all, say all organisations are on a journey, and we all are. Okay, but it's about sometimes you need to get things done, being nice and polite. All right, and you need to take action, and that means activism at some point. And as a leader, sometimes you just need to take action or empower those to take action. Is it okay? Can I? Yeah, fine, go ahead. There's some people take the mantra, I keep going until somebody tells me, Pete, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, well, that's a learning experience. Or I could wait for it and then nothing happens. You get inertia, then we're all waiting around for some bright idea or someone to be brave enough to take action. And as a leader, our behaviors, and I'm sorry, broken record, but our behaviors lead the way. We show. The good news is people are watching you all the time as a leader, and they're picking your good points. The bad news is people are watching you, right? And they're picking all your bad points and things like that. So going back to leadership point, in summary, it's really, we don't know how far we cast our shadow. We don't know the impact that we have on others around us. And we might not even have sight of those individuals, but no, somebody's watching us. And so we need to be mindful how we communicate, how we behave, how we leverage in, how we support. It's really key and really important.
Thanks, Peter. What you're describing is in a business environment where psychological safety is so important, because to react quickly, people need to be able to be happy to fail and get things wrong, don't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So just again, going back to our report specifically and thinking about the trend towards more inclusive hiring practices such as anonymised recruitment and bias mitigation strategies. Some of us will be familiar with John Lewis's announcement around releasing their interview plans prior to interviews for everybody. Thinking about the challenges that organisations face and these practices, how can they overcome them? How do you ensure that these practices are consistently applied across all the levels of organisation? And Jason, I'm going to come to you because you touched on that idea of stopping and looking at your hiring processes in your previous answer.
Sure. I mean, the John Lewis one is interesting because that sparks a lot of debates. Pros and cons, by the way, pros and cons.
Yeah.
But I do think it's proof sometimes of decisions that can be made with good intent, potentially whereby a group of individuals who don't have the breadth of perspectives needed to maybe always land at the right position. Not to say it's a bad thing, but to say that I think you need to consider the different types of talent and different demographics and psychographics of the individuals that we engage with. So I guess what I'll start with awareness and I guess culture first of all. And I could always come back to this idea that culture eats strategy. There's a brilliant book that breaks it down for us. But we can do whatever we like. We can implement as many processes, tech as we want to. But if we don't have the buy-in and the support of hiring managers, of business leaders, it will either be forgotten or people will find a way to circumnavigate it. We've worked with organizations who have implemented some great strategies, and we've seen organizations who have put in some really strong procedures, such as I must see a balanced slate, before you can hire. Well, it's a great idea, but it means that if the business don't buy into it, they will find a way to game that requirement. So rather than the intent of kind of more diversity, we see the same, candidate being put forward to multiple roles in order to deliver against a balanced slate. So I guess where I'm going is that is that we do need to educate and create a level of awareness, because if we want the change, we either need a good business reason to change, either for a win or fear, right? Or we need empathy. And so from one of those, we will get individuals to support it. That's the first thing, because at least then when we put something good in, it will be championed and we can learn from it. I think we've also got to be prepared to engage with a wide group of individuals to get different perspectives. I was skimming, some of the questions whilst you were speaking just now, and there was someone in the chat who talked about, AI and navigating its, the bias that's within it. And I think it's one of those tools that's out there to help us potentially be better in this space, but we have to be aware. So we've got to ask the right questions. Now, if we don't know how we're arriving at a decision, because the tech that we're using has what's it called, black box kind of rules to it, then how can we be comfortable that we should use it? I think our role in this is knowing what we do and why. And if we can answer the why and the outcome that we want to drive, then I think that's when we start to be a little bit more, a little bit more successful. The challenges that we face at the moment is that there is so much tech and there is so many new ways of doing things that if you want to be a first mover and get that advantage with it, you need to have the right level of governance. So that means that you need to have a backup plan, or you need to run A and B testing. You need to engage with assessment, psychologists in order to ensure that we're making good decisions. We need to engage with the Peters and the Joels of the world, right, to give us a different view on it from an angle that we potentially haven't, we haven't thought about. The final bit for me around consistency just comes down to governance and how much it means to us as an organization. I think it's quite interesting when I talk to organizations about their inclusion and diversity initiatives, and sometimes they're optional. If something is business critical, why is it optional?
Optional.
Yeah. There are many things in our organizations that we are not allowed to do. I would get in a lot of trouble if I decided to, change critical processes or just start a new Hays business tomorrow. I'm sure, I'm sure I'd have conversations about it. If it's critical and it's important, and I think that most organizations think that their people are critical and important, then what we do shouldn't be mandatory. Sorry, apologies. It should be mandatory. Policy, complete inverse of what I mean. We should take it seriously. And so if we're worried about consistency, mandate it. Put
Completely
governance
agree.
in place and use data, and let's check that it's taking place. The one thing I will say, and I was told by a colleague many years ago, you can expect something to happen, but occasionally you have to inspect to be sure. And I think that is the only way that you can be sure that what you want to happen is happening consistently across your organization.
Thanks, Jason. I'm conscious of time. We've got a few questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to do one more question about a report. And Joel, this one's for you. How can organisations better engage with and support a diverse workforce? And can this extend past their organisations to help create a more inclusive world outside of work? And how can this help to encourage more diverse candidates to apply for more? It says senior roles, but I would say roles, because we need diversity everywhere to get to the senior point. Do you have a view on that?
I think there are so many different ways that can be done. If I maybe home in on the actual brand building of the organization. A mentor once said to me many years ago, and rest in peace now, but he said to me that never forget where you come from, because that's what makes you who you are, but never forget where you're going, because that's who you're going to become. And that always stuck with me, because in the world of business, that the journey is always evolutionary, and therefore what you stand for could change, but the core principles behind what you stand for should never. My own personal view. And so when it comes to communicating what you stand for as an organization, both internally and externally, there should be a really clear core purpose, core value that is non-negotiable. Because that's what people buy into. It's the whole kind of Simon Sinek, it talks about what's the why, being very clear on the why. That's what people buy into. They don't buy into the things that you provide. But people don't often care about the products or service you give them. They care about how it makes them feel. They care about the why. They care about the impact on their lives, their values, the alignment of all of those things. So for me, it's about making sure that the brand that you have is consistent with the why that people are following for, or engaging with you with, or why they want to work for your organization. That being said, there is a caveat. The caveat that is the brand is never owned by you. It's owned by those very same stakeholders, because we're living in a world where it's what people say and the amplification of what they say and do that can have a direct impact on how your brand is perceived, whether or not they believe you're white or not. And that's just the danger of the kind of modern technical digital world that we're in, that it's easy to create an audience and a lot of noise around something that's either good or bad that can have an impact, good or bad, on the organization. So there's something about brand management that's got to be very important, but accepting that you don't own your brand. We're seeing that particularly in the technology space, where many organizations focus so much on the delivery of what they're doing, they forget about the fundamentals that we're talking about. They forget about the people, the processes, the inclusive states. They forget about their why with the people. It's more about what they deliver based on the marketing of their brand and the marketing of their solution. And I know I'm talking about one particular sector, but it's certainly something to consider. I think the other thing as well is to allow people to speak. And what I mean by that is, sometimes organizations might want to curtail people's ability to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of an organization. But people buy into the authenticity more than ever before, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So it's about making sure that you're creating that. And I think, again, Pete, I think you mentioned earlier, that kind of psychological safe space where people feel they can have a voice, but also being authentic enough as an organization and as leaders to stand up and say, well, you know what, we got that wrong. This is a journey that we are on. This is where we are. We need support for X, Y, and Z, but this is where we're going to be. And it's that authentic journey that people see you on, is that they walk alongside you, even those who were your haters, so to speak, or the ones who certainly didn't have your best interest at heart because of how they perceived or their experience with your organization. Specifically with your workforce and organizations, it's about, going back to my earlier point, I would say, in terms of that alignment of values. Does this organization reflect me? And do I reflect this organization? Now, you can take it into many different ways, but at its basic core, it's people need to feel that they're connected, particularly after what we've gone through over the last few years as a world. People want to feel more connected than ever before. As human beings, we're tribal, we're social, we connect. So in the workplace, that's no different. Yeah. I don't care about title, responsibility. People want to connect. So the question is, how are you creating that space where people can feel connected to the organization and to the purpose that we're all trying to achieve.
That's interesting because actually I was thinking moving on to the Q&A so we can answer some of the live questions, but connected to your point about connection, there's a question about remote and flexible working. Now, report said that 79% of people surveyed said they want remote or flexible working, but how do companies ensure that their policies around that, their practices, etc., don't alienate people from disadvantaged backgrounds that may not want or be able to work from home? Do you have a view on flexible working and a diverse workforce, but also that point?
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point. You know, digital poverty is a real thing in disadvantaged communities. Let's not skirt over that. It absolutely is. And arguably, those from a disadvantaged background, because of what they've had to go through or are going through, they've actually got some of the more resilient and, dare I say, softer skills that employers are actually looking for versus someone who hasn't come from that background. So I'm a great believer that there's actually success in your disadvantage. It's whether or not you have this space, the opportunity and support to have that realized, to be able to bring that into a more advantaged environment. And I think that's the role of employers, to really seek that kind of insight and talent and power from those who they would class as disadvantaged. Because arguably, again, you know, very simple analogy, if you've got 100 people from disadvantaged backgrounds all in one space and they've all been disadvantaged from day dot, what is normal to them may not be normal to people who are not disadvantaged.
Yes.
But they themselves may not see themselves as disadvantaged, depending upon the perception that they have of themselves and the culture that they're in. Those outside may see them as disadvantaged. The moment you take them out of the environment or a new space, those things become realized. It doesn't mean they've changed who they are. It means that they've changed the perception of who they are based on the new environment that they're in. So the role of employers is to help that person to understand it doesn't matter what environment that you're in, you are worth something, you can bring something to the table, and here's the opportunity for you to do so. That person will then have some of the core skills that you wouldn't even recognize because life has been more difficult than the workplace. To them, to many people, the workplace is easy, though challenging. Real life is harder than that. But if they can survive real life, give them the space in the workplace, and you'll give them the opportunity to be the best that they can be. So I do agree there are challenges, and specifically with the hybrid working, I think it's about more organizations maybe providing more opportunities for those young people to utilize equipment that they may not use anymore, or work with charities that can provide that type of support. Make sure that there are just more sustainable ways of trying to provide support than a quick flash in the pan with ticked our box and we're moving on.
Yes, it's flexibility and flexibility, isn't it? Having a flexible policy, make it flexible for everybody.
Make it flexible for everybody, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Another question I can see in the chat. So for unconscious bias training, there are competing notions on this front, as some say it may justify some people's bad behaviour. How do you ensure that there is meaningful and practical unconscious bias training provided to employees and management that reduces that risk? Peter, I reckon you would do a great job of answering this question from a starting point. Not that the other two wouldn't, obviously.
Oh no, definitely have other interventions. I can't help it. It's just me, isn't it? It's unconscious. What can I do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's unconscious bias. What we argue at Fair is that unconscious bias training by itself doesn't work. Okay, we've always known that. You need several key factors around that. You need to have an inclusive culture for number one, where you can do authentic learning and put those behaviors into place as such. And then you need to kind of help people mitigate and learn what, because biased behavior is learned behavior. And the good news is you can unlearn it, but it takes work. It takes hard work because bias is quite rapid, quite fast thinking, and every day. And even harder, it never switches off. So even when we came on the call, there may be a biased perception about us as individuals. And then as we're going along, we're starting to unpick those biased behaviors, all those expectations, maybe those stereotypes that individuals may have, rightly or wrongly as such. And so when it comes to bias training, I like to think about our program at Fairer is around what we call conscious inclusion as such. So we can learn about biases, and there are over 151 of them, fill your boots. But I always go, so what? How does it apply to my role? Okay. And critically, how does it apply to my decision making as such? Now, I'm going to be open and share over 1,000 people on here, so I'm going to share my bias with you. Okay, psychologically safe space. So my bias is this: if I'm interviewing, I have a female candidate and a male candidate, is this. And if the female candidate says a single parent, my bias is tuned in to her saying, I believe every word that she's saying. Now, where does that come from? But that comes from me growing up. My mum bring me up from the age of 3. You know, what she said, she did. You know, 3 jobs, all that usual stuff. You know, dad was great. They had a great relationship. But he was a talker. I think that's where I get that from. Okay. But mum was a doer. And so she what she said done. So if I have a female candidate and a male candidate, and they're giving examples of what they do, it's very easy for me to lean into the method. Where's the evidence? How did you do that? Where's the evidence of doing that? How did you engage this challenge? What steps did you go through? It rolls off the tongue. Whereas a female candidate is actually, I'm much more forgiving. Having that awareness, I now need to be equally challenging to the female candidate. So awareness of my personal biases and how that can influence my decision making helps me make fair decision making. I had to get it in there, sorry. All
Thank
right.
you. Brilliant. Brilliant answer, Peter. Really, really quickly, question from somebody about data and how do you get people bought into sharing information about themselves? Jason, we've been on this journey. Have you got a quick fire response to give some advice?
Yeah, quick fire response. Tell the truth. All right. Say,
Yep.
where are we right now?
Yep.
Why do we want the data? What we're going to do about it? What we're going to do with it? When we've done something, go back and tell the truth. This is what we've done so far, and this is what we've learned.
Yep.
That's the fastest way I can summarize it. Let us not make the mistake of putting people through the challenge of declaring information that they may have for a long time kept separate, and miss the opportunity to do something sensible and valuable with it. The only thing I can say is I think the reason why people have become more hesitant in recent years is they can't see what good has come out of sharing their data. So all I would say is buck the trend.
Keep telling them.
And keep telling them.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our speakers for an excellent debate. I'm only sorry that we didn't get through more of our questions, but it reinforces the fact that with anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we could talk about various solutions and issues all day. So we will be sharing our report with you via a link. So again, please keep an eye on your mailboxes and happy reading. Thank you very much.